The arrival in the Northern Sanctuary and the discovery of the sleeping Princess Zelda introduces the foundational lore of the tragedy of the Golden Age. Unlike the Zelda scene in the previous journey, this princess is a relic of a primordial era before the kingdom was fractured. The lore of this first Zelda is centered on the concept of the eternal slumber of the law. Long ago, the Prince of Hyrule sought the Triforce of Courage to complete the divine set, but his sister, Zelda, was the only one who knew the secret of its location. When she refused to speak, a wizard serving the prince cast a spell of infinite night upon her. This represents the corruption of the lineage. The wizard's death immediately following the curse ensured that the key to the dream was lost. This tragedy led to the decree that every female born to the royal house would be named Zelda, turning a personal curse into a continental legacy of grief. The Impa's revelation and the 6 crystals provide the lore of the trial of the worthy. Impa reveals that as Link's 16th birthday approached, a mark of the Triforce appeared on the back of his hand. This is the lore of somatic predestination. The mark is not a blessing, but a key that allows Link to open the sealed scrolls left by the ancient kings. These scrolls dictate the trial of the Valley of Death. To wake the princess and restore the Golden Age, Link must travel to 6 different palaces across the Lesser Hyrule and place a crystal in the forehead of each statue of the Guardian. This represents the fragmented sovereignty. The kingdom's power has been locked away in the earth to prevent another prince's greed from destroying it. Link is not just a hero. He is a divine locksmith, tasked with reopening the vault of the gods. The Parake Palace and the first Guardian, Horsehead, introduce the lore of the Chimeric Guardians. These palaces are not merely dungeons, but testing grounds of the soul built by the ancient kings. Horsehead represents the bestialization of the vow. He is a man-beast created to serve as a living lock. The lore suggests that these guardians were once holy knights who volunteered to be transformed into monstrous sentinels to protect the crystals. This highlights the self-sacrificing nature of the old order. To prove his worth, Link must strike the head of the beast, demonstrating that he has the martial prowess to command the Triforce. The palace itself is a labyrinth of iron and gold, designed to disorient the unworthy and ensure that only the true king can reach the altar. This turns the quest for the crystal into a judgment of character, where the environment itself is an enemy. The discovery of the candle within the Parake Palace introduces the lore of the illumination of the hidden world. In the lore of the adventure of Link, the darkness is not just an absence of light, but a physical barrier created by Ganon's lingering malice. The candle is a sacred tool that allows Link to see the spirits of the dark. This is the lore of the revealed enemy. It proves that the underworld of Hyrule is populated by Shadowkin, who are invisible to the naked eye. This represents the deception of the landscape. The world you see during the day is only a mask. By using the candle, Link is peeling back the layers of reality to find the truth of the corruption. It highlights the clairvoyance of the hero. To save the light, one must first learn to navigate the darkness without fear, turning the hidden into the known. The presence of the Ache and the Acheman provides the lore of the transmutation of the minion. These creatures are bats that transform into demonic humanoids when they land. This is the lore of the unstable form. It suggests that the malice of Ganon is so potent that it causes the nature of beasts to warp into shadows of men. This highlights the regression of the world. Hyrule is slowly being rewilded by the dark, where animals are upgraded into monsters to fill the vacuum left by the dead kingdom. The Acheman represents the terror of the liminal. He is neither beast nor man, but a flicker of hate that exists only to prevent the return of the king. This creates a sense of environmental hostility, where even the walls of the cave are watching the hero with borrowed eyes. The Tingle and the Guerrilla of the northern plains provide the lore of the mercenary remnants. Unlike the demons of the palaces, these are tribal warriors who serve the memory of Ganon. The Guerrilla, with their boomerangs, represent the legacy of the Throne Blade. They are the guerrilla fighters of the wasteland. Their lore suggests that after Ganon was slain by the previous Link, his army did not vanish. they scattered and broke, turning into scavenger warbands. This highlights the lawlessness of the interregnum. Hyrule is no longer a kingdom. It is a battlefield of scattered tribes. Link's journey through the plains is a cleansing of the land, where he must re-establish the law by defeating those who have turned the ruins of the past into nests of the present. The statues of the goddess found at the end of each palace introduce the lore of the petrified witness. When Link places a crystal, the statue absorbs the stone and sinks into the floor, sealing the palace forever. This is the lore of the finality of the test. It suggests that the ancient magic is one use only. Once a guardian is defeated and a crystal is set, that power is permanently transferred to the Great Palace. This represents the concentration of divine energy. Link is pulling the life out of the provinces and channeling it into a single point. This turns the 6 palaces into batteries of faith, highlighting the mathematical precision of the ancient seals. The world is being unplugged from its local guardians to power up the resurrection of the princess. For the tarnished, or rather the Link of this era, the Northern Sanctuary is the point of no return. You realize that your birthright is a weight of history. The lore suggests that Link is the vessel of the Golden Age. You are carrying the hopes of 1,000 years in your hand. The sleeping Zelda is not just a woman. She is the physical manifestation of the law. By waking her, you are restarting the clock of the world. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so ominous. You are not just fighting a monster. You are fighting the sleep of a civilization. You look at the mark of the Triforce on your hand, knowing that the crystals you gather are the syllables of a dead language that only you can speak. As this first segment of the history concludes, Link leaves the Northern Sanctuary, his eyes fixed on the distant peaks of the Parake Palace. The wind of the plains is cold, and the shadows of the ache are already beginning to gather. You have seen the tragedy of the prince, the sacrifice of the guardians, and the trial of the crystals. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from kingdom to divine labyrinth. You realize that the sleeping princess is the final prize of a game of gods that has been played for centuries. You look at your sword, knowing that it is the only key that can cut the night. The Golden Age is a dream, and you are the only one awake enough to chase it into the gloom. The descent into the Midoro Swamp and the infiltration of the Midoro Palace introduces the second narrative layer of the adventure of Link, defined by the lore of the sinking foundations of faith. This region of Hyrule has been reclaimed by the primeval muck, representing the erosion of civilized space. The swamp is not merely a geographic obstacle. It is a spiritual rot that has swallowed the roads and bridges of the Old Kingdom. The lore suggests that the Midoro region was once a thriving center of alchemical research, but the malice of the overworld caused the very earth to liquefy. This highlights the instability of the world without the Triforce. Without the 3 golden weights to balance reality, nature begins to revert to a chaotic slurry, making the journey to the second palace a test of physical and mental endurance. The discovery of the handy glove within the depths of the palace introduces the lore of the architect's secret. This relic is not a weapon of war, but a tool of structural manipulation, allowing Link to break the unbreakable blocks of the palace. This is the lore of the masonry of the gods. It suggests that the palaces were built with a secret logic that requires specific keys of labor to navigate. The handy glove represents the hero's authority over the material. By wearing it, Link is recognized by the stone of the palace, proving that he possesses the will to build, as well as the will to destroy. This highlights the artisanal nature of the trial. The ancient kings did not just want a warrior, they wanted a master of the world's substance, a lord who could shape the kingdom from its very foundation. The guardian of the Midoro Palace, Germa, or Barba in some translations, provides the lore of the draconic sentinel of the depths. Germa is a serpentine beast that emerges from the lava of the core, representing the unchecked power of the underground. Unlike Horsehead, who was a man-beast, Germa is a primal force bound by the crystal. The lore suggests that the ancient kings tethered the dragons of the earth to the palaces to act as perpetual engines of defense. This is the lore of the domesticated calamity. To defeat Germa, Link must strike its head as it rises from the fire, demonstrating his superiority over the elements. This victory proves that the true king is not burned by the fires of the earth, turning the quest for the crystal into a taming of the wild soul of Hyrule itself. The bag of magic, the magic container, found in the hidden corners of the swamp, introduces the lore of the vessel of the infinite. In this era, magic is not a recharging pool, but a physical substance that must be stored within the body. The lore of the bag of magic is the lore of the expanded soul. It suggests that a normal human can only hold a drop of the divine spark, but through these containers, Link is stretching his spiritual capacity. This represents the theological growth of the hero. Link is literally becoming more magical as he travels. This highlights the quantitative nature of divinity in the Old Kingdom. To cast the higher spells like Life or Reflect, one must first increase the volume of their spirit, proving that power is a matter of spiritual volume rather than just intent. The RA and the bot of the Midoro Palace introduce the lore of the sentience of the slime. The bots are gelatinous creatures that split when struck, representing the indestructibility of the basic. The RA, the hovering eyes of the palace, suggest that the building itself is watching the intruder. This is the lore of the living labyrinth. The palaces are not empty stone. They are biological entities that generate defense organisms from the ambient magic of the crystals. This highlights the adaptive hostility of the sanctuary. The security system of the Old Kingdom is organic, turning the quest for the crystal into a biological struggle. Link is not just fighting monsters. He is fighting the white blood cells of a divine immune system that does not yet recognize him as its master. The village of Saria and the lore of the missing bridge provide the transition into the southern reaches. Saria is a refuge of the displaced, a town built on the edge of the swamp where the common people huddle in fear of the moblins in the woods. The lore of the bridge guard is the lore of the bureaucracy of survival. The guard refuses to let anyone pass without a letter of authority, highlighting the isolation of the settlements. In the absence of a ruling Zelda, the towns have become city-states that no longer trust their neighbors. Link's act of finding the mirror for a local lady or finding the water represents the restoration of the social contract. To be a king, Link must first be a neighbor, proving that lordship is built on the smallest kindness. The Stalfos of the Red Aegis found guarding the palace corridors introduce the lore of the skeleton of the guard. These are not zombies, but the animated remains of the knights who failed the trial in centuries past. This is the lore of the failure of the bone. It suggests that the crystal trials have been attempted many times, and the palace does not bury its dead, it recruits them. This represents the cannibalistic nature of the trial. If Link fails, his bones will eventually be raised to prevent the next hero from succeeding. This highlights the eternal duty of the fallen. In the Old Kingdom, death is not an exit from service. The palace is a vampiric institution that consumes the unworthy to protect the sacred, ensuring that only the ultimate hero can ever leave with his soul intact. For the Link of the Midoro era, the swamp is the testing of the senses. You realize that the world is soft and decaying. The lore suggests that Link is the firmament of Hyrule. You are the only solid object in a land of slime and lava. The Midoro Palace is not a reward. It is a muck-filled purgatory where you must find the glove to prove you can hold the world together. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so visceral. You are wading through the filth to find the gold. You look at your red shield, knowing that it is the only thing that can deflect the Ra's gaze. The Golden Age is under the mud, and you are the only hand strong enough to dig it out. As this second segment of the history concludes, Link crosses the Saria Bridge, leaving the smell of the swamp behind as he heads toward the Death Mountain range. The bag of magic at his belt is heavier now, pulsing with a thick, green energy. You have seen the erosion of the land, the masonry of the glove, and the dragon of the core. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from divine labyrinth to decomposing kingdom. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only anchor left for a world that is sinking into the void. You look at the handy glove on your hand, knowing that you will need its grip to climb the mountain of death. The Golden Age is a weight, and you are the only back that can carry the load. The ascent of Death Mountain and the navigation of its volcanic interior introduces the third narrative pillar of the saga, defined by the lore of the Crucible of the Great Divide. In the geography of the adventure of Link, Death Mountain is not just a landmark, but a vertical fortress that separates the northern and southern halves of the continent. The lore suggests that this mountain range acts as the spine of the world, housing the fires that once fueled the creation of the Triforce. However, in the current era, the mountain has become a labyrinth of the abandoned. The ancient roads are gone, replaced by caves of infinite night, where the air is thick with the scent of sulfur and the malice of the Goron Slayers. This is the lore of the geographic severance. By forcing the hero to climb this peak, the ancient kings ensured that only a warrior capable of conquering the earth itself could ever unite the divided provinces of Hyrule. The discovery of the hammer within the deepest cavern of Death Mountain provides the lore of the smith's divine authority. This is not a weapon of war, but a relic of reconstruction. The lore of the hammer is the lore of the shaping of the wild. It was originally used by the titansmiths of the Old Kingdom to pave the roads and carve the tunnels through the bedrock. In Link's hands, it becomes a tool of pathfinding. By breaking the boulders that block the mountain passes, Link is literally reopening the arteries of the kingdom. This represents the hero as a civilizer. He is not just passing through the land. He is repairing the connectivity of a broken world. This highlights the industrial theology of Hyrule. The great king is not just a judge, but a master of the forge who can break the stone to find the true way forward. The Trophy of the Desert, hidden in a cave guarded by the fiercest of Dara warriors, introduces the lore of the stolen honor of the sands. The trophy is a relic of the First Knights, a symbol of victory that was lost when the desert tribes were scattered by Ganon's shadow. The lore suggests that the Dara, alligator men wielding massive axes, are the corrupted sentinels of the wasteland. They have hoarded the trophy as a talisman of strength, believing that as long as they hold it, the Golden Age can never return. This is the lore of the hoarded spirit. By reclaiming the trophy, Link is performing an act of cultural restoration. He is returning the identity of the desert to the royal archives, proving that his lordship is built on the recovery of lost truths, not just the conquest of territory. The encounter with the axe-wielding Dara provides the lore of the brutality of the outcast. These creatures are the most physically imposing enemies Link has faced, representing the primitive violence of the dark. Unlike the iron knuckles of the palaces, who fight with martial grace, the Dara fight with primal rage. This is the lore of the regression into the reptilian. It suggests that those who live in the shadows of Death Mountain eventually lose their humanity, their skin turning to scales and their minds turning to predatory instinct. This highlights the biological cost of the interregnum. Hyrule is shedding its skin, turning into a land of scales and axes, where only the cold-blooded survive. Link's victory over the Dara is a triumph of the human will over the beast of the blood, proving that order is sharper than any stone axe. The elevator shafts and magma pits of the mountain caves introduce the lore of the verticality of the trial. In this era, the journey is defined by the pit and the peak. This is the lore of the gravity of sin. To descend into the caves is to face the weight of the world, while to climb is to aspire to the throne. The lore suggests that the ancient kings built these paths to be unforgiving to the clumsy. This represents the precision of the worthy. One misstep in the dark leads to the fire of the core, proving that lordship is a balance of the feet as much as the mind. This highlights the mechanized nature of the test. The mountain is a natural machine designed to sift the hero from the chaff of the common, ensuring that the king is someone who can walk the edge without falling into the abyss of the earth. The village of Mido and the lore of the Church of the Cross provide the transition toward the third palace. Mido is a city of the rigid, where the residents are suspicious and the priests guard the secret of the shield spell. The lore of the cross is the lore of the visual sanctity. It is a tool that allows Link to see the unseen, specifically the invisible ache that haunt the graveyards. This represents the spiritual sight of the deliverer. To be a king, Link must be able to identify the unholy, even when it hides behind a mask of air. This highlights the exorcistic nature of the quest. Link is not just a soldier. He is a protector of the spirit, proving that true vision is a gift of faith, granted only to those who have conquered the mountain of death and returned with the hammer of law. The Moa and the grave shadows of the Mito Cemetery introduce the lore of the unrest of the ancestors. The Moa are floating eyeballs that drop petrified tears, representing the sorrow of the unburied. This is the lore of the crying dead. It suggests that the cemetery of the king has been desecrated by the presence of Ganon. The dead are no longer sleeping, they are watching with envious eyes. This represents the parasitism of the spirit world. The grave shadows are trying to steal the life of the hero to re-enter the light. This highlights the tragedy of the interregnum. Even the ancestors have turned against the descendant. Link's journey through the graves is a peacemaking mission, where he must slay the sorrow to restore the rest, proving that lordship is the ability to silence the dead. For the Link of the Death Mountain era, the mountain is the forging of the bone. You realize that the world is hard and unmoving. The lore suggests that Link is the quake of Hyrule. You are the only force capable of shattering the obstacles of the old world. The hammer is not a weapon, it is a key of force that you must use to unstick the gears of history. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so ominous. You are breaking the land to save the land. You look at your hammer, knowing that it is the only syllable of the stone that the mountain understands. The Golden Age is behind the boulder, and you are the only hand strong enough to crush the barrier. As this third segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the southern slopes of Death Mountain, the hammer hanging heavy at his belt. Below him lies the Lesser Hyrule and the road to the Island Palace. The air is no longer sulphurous, but salt-laden and cold. You have seen the smithing of the path, the recovery of the trophy, and the brutality of the Dara. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from decomposing kingdom to mechanized purgatory. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only light left in a world that has turned to stone. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that you will need its glow to navigate the Island of Shadows. The Golden Age is a memory of the forge, and you are the only spit of iron left in the cold fire of the mountain. The infiltration of the Island Palace and the navigation of its sea-locked corridors introduces the fourth narrative pillar of the journey, defined by the lore of the isolated divinity. In the geography of the adventure of Link, this palace is severed from the mainland, accessible only by a path of faith that has long since vanished beneath the tides. The lore suggests that the Island Palace was the maritime treasury of the Old Kingdom, where the sea was used as a natural moat to protect the third crystal. This is the lore of the nautical seclusion. By placing a palace in the center of the water, the ancient kings ensured that only a hero who could command the tides or cross the uncrossable could prove his worth. This represents the sovereignty over the infinite blue, where the hero must demonstrate that his will to rule extends beyond the soil and into the untamable wilds of the Great Sea. The discovery of the raft within the heart of the Island Palace provides the lore of the vessel of connectivity. The raft is not merely a piece of wood, but a sacred platform, inscribed with the same runes as the crystals. The lore of the raft is the lore of the bridge over the void. In the Old Kingdom, it was used by the royal messengers to maintain the link between the two continents of Hyrule. In Link's hands, it becomes a tool of continental unification. By launching the raft from the northern docks, Link is relinking the severed lands, proving that his lordship is a force that heals the geographic fracture. This highlights the logistical theology of Hyrule. The Great King is not just a warrior, but a wayfinder who can unite the East and the West, ensuring that the sleeping princess is the queen of a whole world, not just a lonely island. The guardian of the Island Palace, Iron Knuckle Rebenak, introduces the lore of the spectral cavalier. Unlike the previous monsters, Rebenak is a ghostly knight who fights atop a mechanical horse made of enchanted iron. This is the lore of the chivalry of the dead. It suggests that the highest order of knights in the Old Kingdom chose to have their spirits bound to armor to serve as the ultimate test for the hero. This highlights the militaristic purity of the trial. Rebenak does not fight with rage, but with pattern and discipline. To defeat him, Link must first unseat the rider and then engage in a duel of blades, demonstrating that he possesses the martial refinement of a true lord. This victory proves that the king is not just strong, but skilled, turning the quest for the crystal into a ceremony of knightly initiation. The iron knuckles, red and blue, found throughout the palace provide the lore of the living statues of law. These are constructs of will that inhabit the armor of the fallen. The lore suggests that the palace metal is a conductive surface for souls. This is the lore of the embodied guard. It implies that the palaces are spirit batteries that use the power of the crystals to animate the history of the kingdom. This represents the immortality of the duty. The iron knuckles are the steel shadows of the Old Kingdom, ensuring that the standard of the sword remains high. This highlights the inflexible nature of the test. The ancient kings did not trust the living to guard the crystals, as the living can be bribed or broken. Only the dead iron is honest, ensuring that the key to the throne is never handed to a weak hand. The statues of the piranha and the flying heads of the palace introduce the lore of the sentience of the stone. These architectural features are possessed by the palace's defensive magic, spitting fire at anyone who lacks the aura of the king. This is the lore of the hostile environment. It suggests that the palace is a gargantuan trap where the very walls are the weapon. This represents the totalitarian architecture of the gods. The Old Kingdom was a place where disloyalty was met with elemental fire. This highlights the zero-tolerance policy of the trial. To reach the altar, Link must dance through the flames, proving that his focus is absolute. This turns the quest for the crystal into a purification of the reflex, where the hero's body must be as quick as his spirit is pure. The village of Nabooru and the lore of the Thirsty Lady provide the transition into the Eastern continent. Nabooru is a port of the thirsty, a town struggling with a drought of the spirit where the well of grace has run dry. The lore of the water gift is the lore of the sustenance of the subject. By bringing water to the woman who thirsts, Link is quenching the despair of the kingdom. This represents the paternalism of the lordship. To be a king, Link must be the provider of the basic needs, proving that power is the ability to give life. This highlights the humanitarian nature of the quest. Link is not just a soldier, he is a drought breaker, proving that true grace is a cup of cold water, granted only to those who have conquered the Island of Shadows and returned with the Raft of Unity. The wizrobes of the high balcony introduce the lore of the corrupted priesthood. These are masters of the arcane, who have turned their backs on the Golden Order to serve the void of Ganon. This is the lore of the heresy of the mage. It suggests that knowledge without character leads to the blue robe of the traitor. This represents the fragility of the intellectual. The wizrobes use spells of phasing to avoid the steel of the hero, proving that cowardice is the shadow of wisdom. This highlights the anti-intellectual trap of the interregnum. The mages have chosen to hide in the air rather than defend the earth. Link's victory over the wizrobes is a triumph of the tangible over the illusion, proving that lordship is a physical commitment to the reality of the world. For the Link of the Island Palace era, the ocean is the testing of the horizon. You realize that the world is fragmented and deep. The lore suggests that Link is the vessel of Hyrule. You are the only wood capable of floating upon the chaos of the old world. The raft is not a tool. It is a symbol of movement that you must use to rediscover the lost halves of yourself. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so ominous. You are leaving the shore to save the shore. You look at your white sail, knowing that it is the only wind of the king that the ocean understands. The Golden Age is across the horizon, and you are the only sailor strong enough to navigate the storm. As this fourth segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the eastern shore, the raft pulled onto the sand behind him. Before him lies the eastern continent and the road to the Palace of the Woods. The air is no longer salt-laden, but heavy with pollen and ancient greenery. You have seen the isolation of the treasury, the spectral night of the sea, and the thirst of the people. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from mechanized purgatory to vast, uncharted wilderness. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only map left in a world that has lost its way. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that you will need its glow to navigate the forest of the lost. The Golden Age is a seed in the dark, and you are the only sun left in the shadow of the tree. The infiltration of the Palace of the Woods, the Maze Palace, and the navigation of its twisting, recursive corridors introduces the fifth narrative pillar, defined by the lore of the natural overgrowth of the law. Located in the heart of a labyrinthine forest, this palace represents the stifling of the kingdom's breath. The lore suggests that the ancient kings placed this crystal here to harmonize the royal power with the spirit of the wild. But in the absence of a ruler, the forest has turned predatory. This is the lore of the suffocation of order. The palace is designed to mimic the confusion of the woods, using a geometric curse to trap the unrefined mind. This represents the intellectual jungle of the soul, where the hero must demonstrate that his sense of direction is guided by the mark of the Triforce, and not by the deceptive whispers of the leaves. The discovery of the flute within the deepest chamber of the Palace of the Woods provides the lore of the harmonic key of truth. This is not a musical instrument for entertainment, but a relic of vibrational authority. The lore of the flute is the lore of the voice that shakes the earth. In the Old Kingdom, it was used by the high cantors to dispel the mirages of the desert and to reveal the hidden paths of the goddess. In Link's hands, it becomes a tool of metaphysical clarification. By playing the flute, Link is shattering the illusions of the landscape, specifically the giant spider that blocks the southern road. This represents the power of the sacred sound. It highlights the auditory theology of Hyrule. The great king is one who can speak the truth so clearly that the false reality of the dark world simply fades away, proving that sovereignty is a harmony that must be restored to the land. The guardian of the Palace of the Woods, Guma, introduces the lore of the brutalist executioner. Unlike the spectral Rebenak, Guma is a massive, muscular giant wielding a spiked ball and chain. This is the lore of the physicality of the penalty. He represents the heavy hand of the ancient law. The lore suggests that the Palace of the Woods was used as a high court, where those who betrayed the crown were met with infinite weight. This highlights the judicial purity of the trial. Guma does not use magic or horses. He uses momentum and force. To defeat him, Link must dodge the iron ball and strike at the giant's legs, demonstrating that he possesses the agility of the just. This victory proves that the king cannot be crushed by the weight of his own laws, turning the quest for the crystal into a survival of the verdict. The Doomknockers and the Mew found throughout the palace provide the lore of the kinetic saboteurs. The Doomknockers are armored warriors who throw boomerangs that bypass shields, representing the inevitability of the backstroke. The Mew are small, spiked slimes that hide in the floor, representing the hidden dangers of the lowly. This is the lore of the hazards of the path. It suggests that the palace is a testing ground of awareness. This represents the paranoia of the sanctuary. The Old Kingdom was a place where danger could come from the highest knight or the lowest floor tile. This highlights the omnidirectional vigilance of the hero. To reach the altar, Link must be eyes and ears, proving that his focus is not just on the giant in front, but on the slime at the foot. The lore of the fake walls and the hidden pits of the palace introduce the lore of the treachery of the material. In this palace, the very stones are lies. Link must walk through what appears to be solid rock to find the crystal. This is the lore of the transparency of the worthy. It suggests that the ancient magic makes the path visible only to those who trust in the unseen. This represents the faith-based navigation of the hero. The Old Kingdom was built on the principle that sight is a deception. This highlights the spiritual intuition of the lordship. To be a king, Link must be able to walk through the stone of the world's problems, proving that true reality is a matter of the heart, granted only to those who have conquered the Palace of the Woods and returned with the Flute of Revelation. The village of Darunia and the lore of the kidnapped child provide the transition toward the fifth palace. Darunia is a mountain seat of the courageous, a town carved into the cliffs where the people are strong but grief-stricken because the Moblins have stolen their future. The lore of the rescue is the lore of the protection of the innocent. By venturing into the boulder caves to save the child, Link is restoring the hope of the lineage. This represents the parental duty of the king. To be a lord, Link must be the shield of the weak, proving that power is the ability to save the one. This highlights the compassionate nature of the quest. Link is not just a warrior, he is a lifesaver, proving that true strength is a gentle hand, granted only to those who have conquered the maze of the forest and returned with the child of the future. The orange moa and the gorgon heads of the southern mountains introduce the lore of the petrifying gaze of the abyss. These are eyes of malice that drop from the sky to freeze the hero in time. This is the lore of the stagnation of the soul. It suggests that the malice of Ganon is attempting to petrify the kingdom into a state where nothing ever grows. This represents the anti-life nature of the shadow. The moa are the lookouts of the void, ensuring that no new life, the child or new king, Link, can move forward. This highlights the dynamic energy of the hero. Link's movement is a shattering of the stasis, proving that lordship is a constant motion, a river of fire that refuses to be turned to stone by the gaze of the dead. For the Link of the Palace of the Woods era, the forest is the testing of the mind. You realize that the world is complex and confusing. The lore suggests that Link is the compass of Hyrule. You are the only point of truth in a land of mirages and lies. The flute is not an instrument, it is a key of vibration that you must use to retune the world to the song of the goddess. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so ominous. You are playing the music to silence the monster. You look at your golden flute, knowing that it is the only sound of the king that the forest understands. The golden age is in the melody, and you are the only musician strong enough to play the song of the end. As this fifth segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the edge of the ocean road, the flute resting against his chest. Before him lies the sea of the south and the road to the palace of the ocean. The air is no longer heavy with pollen, but sharp with the salt of the deep. You have seen the overgrowth of the law, the voice of the key, and the giant of the verdict. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from vast wilderness to deep-sea purgatory. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only breath left in a world that is drowning in the dark. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that you will need its glow to navigate the palace of the tides. The golden age is a pearl in the abyss, and you are the only diver strong enough to bring it to the light. The infiltration of the palace of the ocean, the fifth palace, and the navigation of its submerged, brine-crusted halls introduces the sixth narrative pillar, defined by the lore of the weight of the sunken sovereignty. Located in the southeastern reaches of the eastern continent, this palace represents the drowning of the royal lineage. The lore suggests that the ancient kings placed the fifth crystal within this aquatic fortress to signify the crown's power over the abyssal reaches. In the current era, the palace has become a sluice gate of malice, where the salt of the sea has corroded the golden statues and the pressure of the deep tests the physical integrity of the intruder. This is the lore of the crushing depth of duty. The palace is designed to mimic the crushing weight of the ocean, using hydraulic traps and bottomless brine to swallow the unrefined soul. This represents the submerged trials of the spirit, where the hero must demonstrate that his resolve can withstand the pressure of the world without breaking. The discovery of the boots within the flooded vaults of the Palace of the Ocean provides the lore of the firmament of the surface. This is not a common pair of footwear, but a relic of surface tension authority. The lore of the boots is the lore of the step that refuses to sink. In the Old Kingdom, they were worn by the Sea Strider Knights to move across the lesser Hyrule Sea as if it were solid stone. In Link's hands, they become a tool of metaphysical elevation. By wearing the boots, Link is denying the gravity of the abyss, allowing him to walk upon the surface of the ocean to reach the hidden eastern islands. This represents the superiority of the king over the chaos. It highlights the hydrodynamic theology of Hyrule. The great king is one who walks above the drowning masses, proving that sovereignty is the ability to rise, granted only to those who have conquered the palace of the tides. The guardian of the palace of the ocean, Barba, the Volvagiakin, introduces the lore of the volcanic serpent of the salt. Unlike the giants of the woods, Barba is a long, serpentine dragon that emerges from the subterranean magma vents beneath the seafloor. This is the lore of the meeting of fire and water. He represents the volatile core of the kingdom's passion. The lore suggests that the palace of the ocean was built over a deep-sea trench, where the world's heat meets the world's cold. This highlights the elemental balance of the trial. Barba does not use chains or horses. He uses lava and speed. To defeat him, Link must strike at the dragon's head as it lunges from the pits, demonstrating that he possesses the precision of the absolute. This victory proves that the king can harness the fire within the flood, turning the quest for the crystal into a mastery of the dual nature. The Mao and the blue wizrobes found throughout the palace provide the lore of the spectral saboteurs. The Mao are statues that come to life when the hero's back is turned, representing the betrayal of the familiar. The blue wizrobes are masters of infinite phasing, throwing beams of pure magic that pierce even the shield of the goddess. This is the lore of the intangibility of the enemy. It suggests that the palace is a testing ground of the intangible. This represents the spiritual insecurity of the sanctuary. The Old Kingdom was a place where the solid could become ghostly at a moment's notice. This highlights the constant realignment of the hero. To reach the altar, Link must be solid in a liquid world, proving that his being is more real than the illusion of the palace, ensuring that the crystal of the deep is returned to the light of the sun. The lore of the invisible bridges and the pitfall traps of the palace introduce the lore of the void beneath the foot. In this palace, the ground itself is a suggestion. Link must use the boots of faith to cross gaps that appear to be leaps into the grave. This is the lore of the support of the unseen. It suggests that the ancient magic provides a bridge only to those who have the courage to step into the dark. This represents the gravitational faith of the hero. The Old Kingdom was built on the principle that support is a reward for action. This highlights the structural integrity of the lordship. To be a king, Link must be able to stand where others fall, proving that true foundation is a matter of the vow, granted only to those who have conquered the serpent of the pit and returned with the boots of the sea. The village of Old Kasuto and the lore of the invisible town provide the transition toward the final palace. Kasuto is a city of ghosts, a town that has been erased from the map by the malice of Ganon. The lore of the invisible people is the lore of the erasure of the subject. By using the Cross of Vision, Link reveals that the town still exists, but its people have become specters of fear. This represents the amnesia of the kingdom. To be a lord, Link must remember the forgotten, proving that power is the ability to restore identity. This highlights the restorative nature of the quest. Link is not just a warrior. He is a chronicler of the lost, proving that true grace is the act of seeing, granted only to those who have conquered the deep-sea vault and returned with the sight of the ancient kings. The Doomstayers and the Red Acheman of the Kasuto Woods introduce the lore of the harbingers of the final night. These are elite shadows that hunt the hero in the woods of no return. This is the lore of the hunger of the void. It suggests that the malice of Ganon is becoming desperate as the sixth crystal approaches. This represents the anticipatory terror of the dark. The Acheman are the high priests of the Batkin, ensuring that the path to the hidden palace remains sown with blood. This highlights the momentum of the hero. Link's advance is a cleaving of the night, proving that lordship is an unstoppable force, a tide of light that refuses to be damned by the screams of the forest of the dead. As he moves toward the secret of the Three-Eye Rock, For the Link of the Palace of the Ocean era, the sea is the testing of the weight. You realize that the world is deep and corrosive. The lore suggests that Link is the buoyancy of Hyrule. You are the only force capable of rising above the drowning sins of the old world. The boots are not a tool. It is a symbol of standing that you must use to walk the surface of the chaos. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so ominous. You are walking the waves to save the waves. You look at your golden boots, knowing that it is the only step of the king that the ocean understands. The Golden Age is at the bottom of the sea, and you are the only anchor strong enough to bring it home. As the sixth segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the edge of the Three-Eye Rock, the boots leaving dry prints on the wet sand. Before him lies the Valley of Death and the road to the Hidden Palace. The air is no longer sharp with salt, but heavy with the smell of ancient dust. You have seen the drowning of the lineage, the step of the surface, and the serpent of the salt. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from deep-sea purgatory to the Valley of the Final Judgment. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only soul left in a world that is waiting for the end. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that you will need its glow to navigate the Palace of the Three Eyes. The Golden Age is a crystal in the stone, and you are the only hammer left in the shadow of the rock. The infiltration of the Hidden Palace, the Sixth Palace, within the Three-Eye Rock introduces the seventh narrative pillar, defined by the lore of the geometric seal of the desert. This palace is not hidden by geography alone, but by a sound-based lock that requires the resonance of the flute to manifest. The lore suggests that the ancient kings placed the final crystal within this subterranean vault to represent the solidification of the law. In the current era, the Hidden Palace has become a sarcophagus of order, where the air is stale with the dust of centuries and the stone walls are reinforced with anti-magic alloys. This is the lore of the finality of the vault. The palace is designed to be the ultimate barrier before the Great Palace, using recursive labyrinths and teleportation thresholds to fracture the intruder's sense of reality. This represents the deconstruction of the hero, where Link must prove that his identity is more permanent than the illusions of the Three Eyes. The discovery of the magic key, the skeleton key, within the deepest sub-basement provides the lore of the universal authority over the portal. This is not a simple lockpick, but a master key of the royal house that resonates with the mechanical soul of every door in Hyrule. The lore of the magic key is the lore of the end of obstruction. In the Old Kingdom, it was held by the Grand Vizier to ensure that no part of the kingdom was ever closed to the crown. In Link's hands, it becomes a tool of absolute access. By wielding the magic key, Link is abolishing the concept of the locked door, proving that his lordship is a force that permeates all boundaries. This highlights the political theology of Hyrule. The Great King is one for whom nothing is hidden and nothing is barred, proving that sovereignty is the power to open, granted only to those who have reached the penultimate altar. The guardian of the Hidden Palace, Volvagia, the Barba of the Rock, introduces the lore of the incarnate fury of the core. While the previous dragonkin lived in the sea, Volvagia is the true earth drake that feeds on the heat of the Valley of Death. This is the lore of the breath of the apocalypse. He represents the destructive potential of the golden power if it were to fall into the wrong hands. The lore suggests that the Hidden Palace was built over a spirit well, where the Earth's magma is most concentrated. This highlights the thermal purity of the trial. Volvagia does not use weapons. He is the weapon of the Earth. To defeat him, Link must strike at the dragon's head as it emerges from the lava, demonstrating the resilience of the chosen. This victory proves that the king is fireproof, turning the quest for the crystal into a survival of the divine heat. The iron knuckles, silver and gold, found throughout the palace provide the lore of the refined guard. These are the most powerful animated armors in the kingdom, representing the purity of the metal and the will. The lore suggests that these suits were forged from the Triforce-tempered steel that was used to build the original Northern Sanctuary. This is the lore of the incorruptible sentinel. Unlike the rusted guards of the swamp, These warriors shine with a divine luster that deflects ordinary steel. This represents the persistence of the perfected duty. The silver and gold iron knuckles are the final guardians of the history, ensuring that only a hero who has mastered the sword to a superhuman degree can pass. This highlights the elitist nature of the trial. The ancient kings designed this palace to be a culling ground for any hero who was merely good but not transcendently great. The lore of the falling tiles and the infinite elevator of the palace introduce the lore of the unstable ascent. In this palace, the ground is literally falling away beneath the hero's feet. Link must run across crumbling bridges that vanish into the abyss. This is the lore of the momentum of the vow. It suggests that the ancient magic is withdrawing as the hero approaches the end. This represents the kinetic faith of the hero. The Old Kingdom was built on the principle that standing still is the same as falling. This highlights the active nature of the lordship. To be a king, Link must be faster than the decay, proving that true stability is found in progress, granted only to those who have conquered the Drake of the Three Eyes and returned with the key of the world. The Valley of Death and the lore of the lava path provide the transition toward the final sanctuary. This region is a hellscape of the present, where the malice of Ganon is so thick it has turned the earth into a sea of fire. The lore of the Path of the Worthy is the lore of the walk through the Inferno. By using the boots and the hammer, Link navigates a geography that should be impassable to mortals. This represents the deification of the hero. To be a lord, Link must walk where no man can live, proving that power is the ability to survive the void. This highlights the ascetic nature of the quest. Link is no longer a boy from the woods. He is a divine traveler, proving that true grace is a cold spirit in a burning land, granted only to those who have placed the 6 crystals and shattered the seal of the Great Palace. The Fokker and the Blue Dara of the Valley introduce the lore of the final guard of the Ganon remnants. These are the elite assassins sent by the followers of Ganon to prevent Link from reaching the Great Palace. This is the lore of the desperation of the shadows. It suggests that if Link places the crystals, the opportunity to resurrect Ganon with Link's blood will vanish forever. This represents the temporal pressure of the dark. The Fokker are bird knights that leap with preternatural grace, ensuring that the path of the 6 crystals is bathed in the hero's blood. This highlights the violent conclusion of the journey. Link's approach is a Golgotha of the blade, proving that lordship is a bloody commitment, a covenant of scars that refuses to be broken by the screams of the assassins of the valley. For the Link of the Hidden Palace era, the desert is the testing of the key. You realize that the world is closed and hostile. The lore suggests that Link is the opener of Hyrule. You are the only hand capable of unlocking the potential of the old world. The magic key is not a tool, it is a symbol of permission that you must use to enter the heart of the kingdom's history. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so ominous. You are opening the doors to close the night. You look at your golden key, knowing that it is the only voice of the king that the palace understands. The Golden Age is behind the 6th seal, and you are the only sovereign strong enough to turn the lock. As the 7th segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the threshold of the Great Palace, the 6 crystals now glowing in the distance behind him as the barrier of the valley dissolves. Before him lies the sanctum of the Triforce and the road to the final judgment. The air is no longer heavy with dust, but electric with divine energy. You have seen the seal of the 3 eyes, the universal key of the Vizier, and the incarnate fury of the Drake. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from deep-sea purgatory to the ultimate sanctuary of the Golden Power. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only hope left in a world that is holding its breath. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that you will need its blaze to navigate the palace of the final shadow. The Golden Age is a breath in the void, and you are the only lungs left in the heart of the kingdom. The infiltration of the Great Palace introduces the lore of the Citadel of the Final Apotheosis. This is the most sacred and terrifying structure in the Hylian landscape, a floating bastion of golden stone that acts as the metaphysical battery for the entire Triforce. Unlike the previous palaces, which were designed to test specific virtues, the Great Palace is the synthesis of the sovereign challenge. The lore suggests that the ancient kings built this sanctum within the Valley of Death to ensure that any hero who reached it would be tempered by the Inferno. The architecture here is a divine labyrinth, where the floors are made of relic glass, and the air is saturated with the original breath of the goddesses. This represents the dissolution of the mortal hero. To enter these halls is to leave the world of men and enter the mechanized heart of God, where every step is a calculation and every breath is a prayer. The acquisition and use of the thunder spell provides the lore of the wrath of the celestial king. This is the ultimate magical manifestation in the Hylian arsenal, a spell that requires the total depletion of the caster's spirit to invoke. The lore of thunder is the lore of the great equalizer. It represents the power to strip away the invulnerability of the shadow. In the Old Kingdom, this spell was reserved for the Avatar of Justice to use against the unkillable horrors of the void. In the hero's hands, it becomes the only tool capable of breaking the aegis of the final guardians. This represents the deification of the hero's voice. By calling down the thunder, you are speaking with the authority of the heavens, proving that your will has been synchronized with the cosmic law. This highlights the electric theology of the throne. The king is not just a ruler, but a lightning rod for the divine, capable of cleaving the darkness with a single, devastating thought. The appearance of the Fokker, bird knights, throughout the Great Palace introduces the lore of the avian executioners of the sun. These are the highest-ranking sentinels of the ancient guard, representing the swiftness of the divine judgment. Unlike the heavy, grounded iron knuckles, the Fokker possess the agility of the wind, leaping across the massive pits of the palace with defiant grace. The lore suggests that these knights were elevated by the ancient magic to represent the ascension of the spirit. This is the lore of the unreachable guard. They represent the air that the hero must breathe to become king. This highlights the evolutionary nature of the trial. To defeat a Fokker, you must match their kinetic perfection, demonstrating that your body has become as light and unstoppable as the goddess's breath. This victory proves that the king is not bound by the earth, turning the infiltration into an aviation of the soul. The lore of the blue stone and the red plate within the palace introduce the lore of the chromatic resilience of the order. The Great Palace is constructed from enchanted alabaster and lava-tempered granite, materials that are immune to all forms of lower magic. This represents the permanence of the divine foundation. The lore suggests that the palace grows and heals itself using the energy of the sleeping Princess Zelda. This highlights the parasitic sanctity of the building. The palace is feeding on the potential of the princess to maintain its impossibility. This represents the stasis of the Golden Age. The kingdom has been frozen in stone to prevent its corruption, turning the Great Palace into a gilded prison for history. Link's journey through its halls is a shattering of the jar, an attempt to release the life back into the world of mortality. The giant bubbles and the invisible sentries provide the lore of the omnipresent surveillance of the law. In the Great Palace, the very air is alive with sentient sensors that track the hero's heartbeat. This is the lore of the eye that never blinks. It suggests that the ancient kings did not trust the darkness to be empty. This represents the paranoia of the perfect state. The Old Kingdom was a place where privacy did not exist for the servants of the crown. This highlights the transparent integrity of the hero. To reach the final chamber, you must be pure under the gaze, proving that your intent can withstand the infinite scrutiny of the spirits. This turns the quest into a trial of the transparent soul, where the hero's heart is mapped by the spirits of the glass as he moves toward the center of the world. The Faka, Redbird Knights, of the lower levels introduce the lore of the Berserker of the altar. These warriors are infused with the fire of the valley, representing the aggression of the holy. They do not guard the palace. They hunt the hero within its walls. This is the lore of the violent necessity of the end. It suggests that the final test is not a duel, but a slaughter. This represents the bloody threshold of the throne. The Old Kingdom believed that the Lord must be the strongest predator in the land. This highlights the Darwinian nature of the sovereignty. To be a king, you must kill the best to be the best, proving that power is a hierarchy of the blade. This turns the great palace into a coliseum of the divine, where the red Fokker act as the reapers of the unfit, ensuring that the Triforce is never touched by a timid hand. The infinite staircases and the bottomless shafts introduce the lore of the geometric exhaustion. In this stage, the palace begins to fold inward on itself. This is the lore of the labyrinth of the mind. It suggests that the ancient magic is trying to confuse the will of the intruder. This represents the mental fortitude of the lordship. The Great Palace is a puzzle of the infinite, where up and down are suggestions of the spirit. This highlights the navigational purity of the hero. You must find the one true path through 1,000 false doors, proving that your direction is determined by the mark and not by the walls of the stone. This is the final orienting of the soul, where the hero becomes the compass that the world uses to find its center once more. For the hero in the heart of the Great Palace, the architecture is the testing of the essence. You realize that the world is made of glass and light. The lore suggests that Link is the shatter point of the universe. You are the only solid object in a kingdom of spectral forms. The Thunder Spell is not a power, it is a declaration of existence that you must use to prove you are real to a palace of ghosts. This perspective is what makes this stage so ominous. You are breaking the gods to save the people. You look at your golden sword, knowing that it is the only syllable of the iron that the alabaster understands. The Golden Age is behind the lightning, and you are the only cloud strong enough to release the storm. As this segment of the history concludes, the Tarnished, the Link of the final hour, stands before the door of the altar, the thunder still ringing in his ears. Behind him lies a trail of bird feathers and broken iron. Before him lies the guardian of the Triforce and the final mirror. The air is no longer electric, but perfectly still. You have seen the wrath of the Celestial King, the leap of the Bird Knight, and the glass geometry of the gods. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from sanctuary to engine of the end. You realize that the sleeping princess is the only truth in a world of golden mirages. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that it is burning with the heat of the final choice. The Golden Age is a breath in the mirror, and you are the only reflecting surface left in the void of the Great Palace. The confrontation with the Thunderbird within the deepest sanctum of the Great Palace introduces the lore of the avian tempest of the Divine Gate. This entity is not a living creature of flesh and bone, but a manifestation of the palace's defensive energy. The lore suggests that the ancient kings, fearing the return of a power as destructive as Ganon, forged a guardian from the essence of the storm itself. The Thunderbird represents the unpredictability of the Great Law. Its body is composed of coalesced lightning and sacred feathers that shed sparks with every beat of its massive wings. This is the lore of the final filter. To reach the Triforce, the hero must survive a being that embodies the very thunder he has used to navigate the world. This creates a state of metaphysical paradox. You are fighting the source of your own power to prove you are worthy of wielding its ultimate form. The aura of the Guardian provides the lore of the invulnerable spirit. When the battle begins, the Thunderbird is protected by a shield of pure frequency that renders it immune to physical steel and elemental magic. This is the lore of the barrier of the unseen. It suggests that the final secret of the kingdom is protected by a lock of the mind. To harm the beast, the hero must use the Thunder Spell not to destroy it, but to harmonize his soul with the Guardian's frequency. This represents the total synchronization of the hero. By casting the spell, you are stripping away the mask of the divine, proving that you possess the intellectual and spiritual keys to unlock the logic of the gods. This highlights the vibrational theology of Hyrule. The Great King is one who can speak the language of the storm, turning a nature of violence into a nature of vulnerability through the power of his commanding voice. The lore of the falling fire and the infinite flight of the guardian introduce the lore of the scorched earth of the sanctum. As the thunderbird takes flight, it rains divine embers upon the hero, representing the purifying fire of the altar. These are not ordinary flames. They are grains of the original sun that burn away the falsehoods of the ego. The lore suggests that the floor of the final chamber is a mirror of the soul that reflects the shadows of the combatants. This is the lore of the exposed character. Every ember that strikes the hero is a judgment. This represents the pain of the transformation. To become a lord, you must be refined in the heat, demonstrating that your will is indestructible even as your body is consumed by the light. This victory proves that the king is tempered steel, turning the battle into a smelting of the self. The Thunderbird's transformation as it takes damage introduces the lore of the fracturing of the divine ego. As its feathers fall and its light dims, the guardian becomes erratic and desperate. This is the lore of the dying logic of the old world. It suggests that the ancient security system is failing, recognizing that a new power, Link, has finally arrived to replace it. This represents the tragedy of the guardian. The Thunderbird was built to die at the hands of the rightful king, yet its programming of the storm compels it to fight until the final spark is extinguished. This highlights the obsolete nature of the Sentinel. The old order must be physically shattered to allow for the new growth. This turns the slaughter of the beast into an execution of the past, ensuring that the future is not chained by the guardians of the ancient gate. The silence of the altar that follows the death of the Thunderbird introduces the lore of the vacuum of the sacred. Once the storm is stilled, the palace becomes perfectly quiet, a state that represents the arrival at the absolute zero of history. The lore suggests that the noise of the world is a defense mechanism that disappears once the king is present. This is the lore of the unspoken law. It implies that true authority does not need to shout. This represents the serenity of the worthy. The hero stands in the void of the altar, where the gold of the Triforce is the only light left in the universe. This highlights the post-war clarity of the soul. The sovereignty is not found in the thunder, but in the stillness that follows it, proving that lordship is the ability to end the storm, granted only to the one who has sustained the heat and silenced the voice of the sky. The ascension to the final platform and the lore of the Shadow Mirror provide the transition toward the ultimate confrontation. The platform is a floating island of glass that hovers over the great heart of the palace. The lore of the glass reflection is the lore of the doubling of the destiny. It suggests that the Triforce of Courage is not a gift, but a reflection. This represents the introspective nature of the final step. To claim the Tri-Power, the hero must first face the only enemy left, himself. This highlights the psychological climax of the quest. Link is not just a warrior who has traveled the world. He is a person who has accumulated the shadows of the journey. This is the final cleansing of the hero, where the Lord must separate his light from his dark, proving that true grace is the mastery of the inner void. The appearance of the Elder Guard, the Triforce Keeper, introduces the lore of the witness of the lineage. This figure is the ghost of the first king, who has waited in the void of the great palace for 16 years to see the mark return. This is the lore of the living history. He does not fight Link, but tests his spirit with a final summoning. This represents the paternalism of the ancient will. He is the grandfather of the law, ensuring that the crown is not stolen, but passed down. This highlights the continuity of the sacred line. Link's presence before the Elder is a return to the father, a homecoming of the king that marks the end of the exile. This turns the great palace into a family crypt of the gods, where the living and the dead meet to finalize the contract of the Golden Age. For the hero standing on the final platform, the Thunderbird's death is the testing of the spirit's weight. You realize that the world is made of energy and choice. The lore suggests that Link is the conductor of Hyrule. You are the only wire capable of carrying the current of the old world without melting. The Thunderbird was not an enemy, It was a resistance that you had to overcome to prove your conductivity. This perspective is what makes this stage so ominous. You have absorbed the lightning to become the light. You look at your sword, knowing that it is vibrating with the frequency of the end. The Golden Age is within your reach, and you are the only being strong enough to hold the final note of the Song of the Storm. As this segment of the history concludes, Link stands before the Elder Guard, the Triforce of Courage glowing on an altar of stone. Behind him lies the ash of the Thunderbird. Before him lies the shadow of his own heart. The air is no longer still, but humming with the power of the three triangles. You have seen the avian tempest, the synchronization of the thunder, and the fracturing of the divine ego. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from engine of the end to the threshold of the reflection. You realize that the sleeping princess is waiting for the resolution of this internal war. You look at the elder, knowing that the final part of the contract is about to be signed in blood and spirit. The Golden Age is a mirror in the void, and you are the only face left to look into the glass. The manifestation of Shadow Link within the final chamber of the Great Palace introduces the lore of the ultimate mirror of the soul. This entity is not a creature of Ganon or a construct of the ancient kings, but a metaphysical projection of Link's own internal struggles. The lore suggests that the Triforce of Courage cannot be claimed by a fragmented spirit. It requires a heart that has looked into its own darkness and remained unshaken. Shadow Link represents the sublimation of the hero's malice. He possesses every skill, every spell, and every reflex that the player has spent the entire journey perfecting. This is the lore of the perfect antithesis. To win the final crystal and wake the princess, the hero must defeat the only being in the universe who knows exactly how he thinks. This creates a state of cyclical combat, where the sword of light meets the blade of shadow in a rhythmic dance that reflects the eternal balance of the Hylian world. The lore of the reflected malice provides the insight that the shadow is a collection of every life Link has taken and every drop of blood he has shed to reach this sanctum. This is the lore of the debt of the warrior. It suggests that the price of peace is the accumulation of necessary violence that must eventually be faced. Shadow Link is the manifestation of the hero's guilt. He uses the same shield and jump techniques, mirroring the player's movements with frame-perfect precision. This represents the symmetry of the self. In the Old Kingdom, the final trial was designed to ensure that the Great King was not a tyrant of light who ignored his own capacity for darkness. This highlights the psychological theology of Hyrule. The true ruler is one who can contain the void within himself, proving that his will is the only force capable of stilling the shadow without being consumed by it. The final arena and the glass floor of the Great Heart introduce the lore of the transparent foundation of reality. As the battle unfolds, the transparency of the room reveals the core of the world, pulsing beneath the combatants. This is the lore of the ground of the infinite. It suggests that the Triforce is the anchor that keeps the world from dissolving into the void. This represents the fragility of the material. The glass represents the perception of the king. If Link wavers, the glass cracks. If he is firm, the glass is as hard as diamond. This highlights the existential weight of the hero. Every strike against the shadow is a strike against the instability of the soul. This turns the duel into a ceremony of internal solidification, where the Lord must tame the reflection to ensure that the foundation of the kingdom remains clear and unbroken for the era to come. The shadow's consumption of magic introduces the lore of the void of the counterspell. Just as Link uses the shield and life spells, the shadow is infused with the negative potential of the arcane. This is the lore of the dark side of the goddess's gift. It suggests that power is neutral, and only the user gives it a moral frequency. This represents the moral ambiguity of the hero's tools. The shadow proves that the hammer can crush the innocent and the thunder can burn the righteous. This highlights the responsibility of the sovereignty. To defeat the shadow, Link must use his magic with superior intent, proving that his spirit is the primary engine, and the spells are merely secondary echoes. This victory proves that the king is master of the energy, turning the battle into a recalibration of the sacred current, ensuring that the Triforce is held by a hand of control. The silence of the Elder Guard during the fight introduces the lore of the non-intervention of the history. The Triforce Keeper watches from the sidelines, representing the indifference of the divine law. He does not help the hero because the shadow is a natural requirement of the ascension. This is the lore of the solitude of the throne. It implies that the final step must be taken alone, without the guidance of the past or the hope of the future. This represents the loneliness of the lordship. The hero is trapped in a moment of absolute present, where the only real thing is the clash of steel. This highlights the individualistic nature of the Hylian salvation. The kingdom cannot save itself, and the gods will not save the king. Link must save himself from his own reflected darkness, proving that true grace is a self-generated light. The death of the shadow and the lore of the merging of the spirits provide the transition toward the final moment. When the shadow falls, it does not vanish. It melts into the hero's own shadow. This is the lore of the acceptance of the whole. It suggests that the shadow was never meant to be destroyed, but reintegrated. This represents the holistic maturity of the hero. By absorbing the reflection, Link becomes complete, gaining the depth required to handle the absolute power of the Triforce. This highlights the internal alchemy of the quest. Link is no longer a boy of the light or a spirit of the dark. He is the unified lord of the equilibrium. This is the final metamorphosis of the sovereign, where the warrior becomes the bridge, proving that true peace is the silence between the strike and the shield. The appearance of the Triforce of Courage introduces the lore of the third part of the divine equation. As the shadow merges, the final piece of the Triforce descends from the ceiling, glowing with an internal heat that matches the mark on Link's hand. This is the lore of the reunification of the law. It suggests that courage is the balance point between power and wisdom. This represents the harmonious trinity of the king. With all three pieces finally in his possession, Link is no longer a candidate, but the physical manifestation of the goddess's will. This highlights the sacramental nature of the achievement. Link's touch upon the gold is a restarting of the cosmic clock, a homecoming of the logic that marks the end of the era of grief. This turns the great palace into a cradle of the new age, where the fragmented world is mended by the touch of the whole. For the hero standing before the completed Triforce, the shadow's defeat is the testing of the internal mirror. You realize that the world is made of perspective and will. The lore suggests that Link is the lens of Hyrule. You are the only glass capable of focusing the light of the old world without cracking. The shadow was not an enemy, it was a blind spot that you had to identify to prove your vision. This perspective is what makes this stage so poetic. You have killed the ghost to become the reality. You look at your golden Triforce, knowing that it is pulsing with the heartbeat of the land. The golden age is within your palm, and you are the only being strong enough to hold the weight of the truth. As this segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the final platform, the Triforce of Courage shining in his uplifted hand. Behind him lies the fading shadow of the void. Before him lies the path back to the northern sanctuary. The air is no longer tense, but radiant with the promise of the dawn. You have seen the mirror of the soul, the reflected malice of the warrior, and the integration of the dark. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from final judgment to the restoration of the light. You realize that the sleeping princess is about to wake to a world that has found its balance. You look at the three triangles, knowing that the final part of the prophecy is about to be fulfilled in the breath of a woman. The Golden Age is a light in the sanctuary, and you are the only lord left to walk the princess into the day. The return to the northern sanctuary and the presentation of the completed Triforce marks the final epic of the chronicle, defined by the lore of the resurrection of the Golden Law. Standing before the altar where the first Zelda has slept for centuries, Link holds the triangles of the goddesses aloft, signaling the end of the eternal night. The The lore suggests that the spell of sleep was not just a curse on a woman, but a stasis field placed upon the morality of the kingdom. To wake the princess is to restart the heart of Hyrule. This is the lore of the absolute restoration. As the gold pulses, the seal of the wizard is dissolved by the higher logic of the Triforce, representing the triumph of divine continuity. The Zelda of the past opens her eyes to a world that has been purified by the trial of the 6 crystals, proving that the price of the blood has been paid in full by the hero's journey. The Waking of Zelda I provides the lore of the return of the primordial witness. Unlike the people of the modern era, this princess remembers a Hyrule that was whole and unbroken. Her return represents the reclamation of the original memory. She is the living document of the Golden Age. The lore suggests that her first breath signals the recalibration of the land's fertility. This is the lore of the botanical grace. As she stands, the withered ley lines of the continent begin to pulse with liquid gold, and the Mid-Oro swamp begins to drain into clear water. This represents the healing of the geographic fracture. To be a queen, Zelda must be the lungs of the land, and her waking is the first deep breath of a kingdom that has been suffocating under the shadow of Ganon for generations, ensuring that the future is rooted in the purity of the source. The lore of the restoration of the Golden Order introduces the final political shift of the saga. With the Triforce of Courage reunited with power and wisdom, the law of the land is no longer a fragmented suggestion, but a physical necessity. The lore suggests that the chaos of the tribes and the malice of the Moblins are instantly subjugated by the vibration of the gold. This is the lore of the passive sovereignty. The Great King does not need to govern. The Triforce simply is. This represents the end of the interregnum. The Lesser Hyrule and the Greater Hyrule are forged into a single unity, proving that lordship is a geometric perfection. This highlights the utopian theology of the end. The adventure was the process of alignment, and the restoration is the final result, where the sword is turned back into the plowshare and the gloom is turned back into the day. The final kiss of the altar provides the lore of the seal of the mortal and divine. As the curtain falls on the sanctuary, the princess and the hero share a moment of human connection that transcends the god's design. This is the lore of the emotional completion. It suggests that the Triforce provided the law, but the people provided the heart. This represents the merging of the myth and the flesh. The Zelda of the Slumber recognizes the link of the mark not as a tool of the goddesses, but as the savior of her soul. This highlights the romantic culmination of the legend. The era of darkness does not end with a declaration, but with a gesture of love, proving that true grace is a personal choice, granted only to the one who has walked the valley of death and returned with the spirit of the king to claim his place in the history. For the hero standing in the light of the new dawn, the waking is the testing of the reality. You realize that the world is finally warm and true. The lore suggests that Link is the awakener of Hyrule. You are the only call capable of disturbing the sleep of the divine without breaking the dream. The 6 palaces were not dungeons. They were steps of an escalator that you climbed to reach the height of the sun. This perspective is what makes the adventure of Link so triumphant. You have cut the thread of the curse to spin the thread of the future. You look at your golden Triforce, knowing that it is silently singing the song of the new kingdom. The Golden Age is no longer a memory, it is the present moment, and you are the only Lord left to walk the world into the light. As this final segment of the history concludes, the Northern Sanctuary is flooded with the first sun of the restoration. Behind you lies the ash of the shadow. Before you lies a Hyrule that is reborn. You have seen the trial of the crystals, the slaying of the Thunderbird, and the waking of the ancient law. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from divine labyrinth to eternal Eden. You realize that the sleeping princess is the first citizen of a world that has outlived its own death. You look at the mark on your hand, knowing that it has faded into the skin, its duty fulfilled by the touch of the gold. The Golden Age is a kiss in the sanctuary, and you are the only face left to smile into the day, as the era of Link begins its long and peaceful reign.